Hello, bonjour, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eric Chaput, Business Advisor at the World Trade Center in Winnipeg. I would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that this webinar is coming to you from Treaty 1 territory, traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and on the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Thank you for joining Employer Advisor Office, an overview, which will be presented by Todd Ward. A few housekeeping information before we start. Please send all webinar questions directly through the chat box at the top of your screen, and Todd will try his best to answer as many questions as possible during today's session. For all logistical questions, please send directly to the chat box, and I will answer your questions as soon as possible. You will also receive the recording and the slides of the presentation within the next week. All right, time to start the webinar. I would like to introduce you to Todd Ward, who is an employer advisor with EAO with over 20 years of WCB experience. He has been with the department since November 22nd. Prior to that, Todd was with the WCB of Manitoba for 11 years as a sector manager for the regional office, and before that with Brandon Regional Health Authority for 10 years as a director responsible for WCB claim, reporting, and claim management. All right, Todd, take it away and let's start this webinar.
Thanks, Eric, and thank you everybody for joining me today. As Eric indicated, my name is Todd Ward and I'm an employer advisor with the Employer Advisor Office. This presentation today will provide a general overview of the workers' compensation system and the role of the Employer Advisor Office. So today's objectives today are to provide an overview of the workers' compensation system, the Employer Advisor Office, how the Employer Advisor Office can assist Manitoba employers, and what an employer can expect when doing business with the Workers' Compensation Board of Manitoba, and we'll be focusing on the areas that are listed in the slide. I'll be stopping through the presentation for questions and then plus taking questions at the end as well. So workers' compensation is injury and disability insurance. It's been established for over 100 years based on the historic principles of collective liability, no-fault compensation, income replacement, no right of action, and independent administration. The principles were expanded over the years to encompass prevention of workplace injuries and diseases and a timely return to work. The WCB provides coverage for over 34,000 employers and 76% of the workforce, and is funded by employers who pay the premiums annually. If you think of it this way, employers are insuring their workers, not unlike how we purchase personal or property insurance. They are governed by the Manitoba Workers' Compensation Act and regulations. There are more than 100 WCB policies that reflect the Act and ensure the WCB engages with workers and employers in a consistent, fair manner. And many of those policies also have operational guidelines as well. So as a business owner, unless you have resources dedicated to managing your workplace injuries and the WCB requirements, understanding all the complexities of this system can be overwhelming. And the Employer Advisor Office was put in place to help with this. As you can see on the slide, there are numerous departments in the WCB, and even knowing who to contact can be difficult to determine. The Assessment Services is responsible for calculating and collecting premiums from employers. This is the department an employer would talk to about their annual premiums or their rate classification and assessment, which I will be discussing later in this presentation. Compensation Services is responsible for injury claim adjudication and management. This is the largest department of the WCB and manages all worker injury claims. The Review Office is the first level of appeal on most WCB reconsideration requests, and the reconsideration process will be covered later in this presentation. Return to Work Program Services is a department that offers free consultation services to help create or improve an employer's return to work program. Compliance Services is there to help employers, workers, and healthcare providers learn and understand their rights and the responsibilities and also enforce the law of the Act. Compliance investigations can result in administrative penalties being imposed. And two examples of areas investigated related to employers are payroll audits and accusations of discriminatory action. Safe Work Services is a division of the WCB that's dedicated to the prevention of workplace injuries and illness. They offer two excellent courses, WCB Basics and Return to Work Basics, that I encourage every employer to take. And when you get this PowerPoint, the links on this slide will actually take you to a description of the two courses. So when an employer is unsure who to speak to, and as you can see, it can be quite confusing on who should I talk to with my issue, we can help them to determine the issue and provide advice and assistance so the employer is well prepared when contacting the WCB. So the Employer Advisor Office is relatively new. It was created in the summer of 2022. And like Eric said, I've just started with them in November of 2022. This is a new program area. Resulted from a 2016 legislative review and a subsequent amendment to the Workers' Compensation Act in 2021. The Employer Advisor's Office mandate is to provide advice and assistance to Manitoba employers navigating the complexities of the workers' compensation system, and including advice and information about their rights and responsibilities under the Act. Employer Advisor Office services are free and confidential, and we may also provide referrals to other agencies and services. A similar program for injured workers has been available under the Act since 1982 through the Worker Advisor Office. The Employer Advisor Office does not provide advocacy services, so we will not contact the WCB on an employer's behalf, nor will we represent employers at appeal commission hearings. However, it is important to note that although we are funded by WCB employer premiums, we are an independent department of the Manitoba government and can speak in confidence with employers. This allows us to discuss issues with the employer that they would not be comfortable speaking directly with the WCB about. And while we can't contact the WCB directly on the employer's behalf, there have been instances where we have contacted them with a hypothetical situation to get an answer for an employer. Being able to speak in confidence with employers has allowed us to be a sounding board for issues or ideas some employers were not comfortable contacting the WCB about. An example of this is a discussion we had with an employer who was thinking of changing how they deliver their services and was concerned about the potential impact this would have on their WCB account and as a result, their annual premiums. They didn't want to speak to the WCB about the idea. However, we were able to review the information and provide some feedback to the employer to help them make an informed decision on their idea. On this slide, there's a link to the Workers' Compensation Act that you can go to see the actual wording on the mandate. So how can the Employer Advisor Office assist employers? As the slide illustrates, there's a wide range of issues that can arise for employers. It is very important for employers to understand their rights and responsibilities under the WCB Act. Unfortunately, that is not always the case. Since our office is opened, we have taken a variety of calls. Some examples of those calls are we've received calls from employers from both in and out of province with general questions and registration requirements. Workers' compensation is provincially mandated and does differ from province to province somewhat. Many employers conduct business in more than one province, and depending on the situation, they may or they may not have to have coverage in multiple provinces. We've also taken calls from employers questioning an injured worker's claim and considering appealing the decision. This typically involves reviewing a complex decision letter and claim documents with the employer. This will be covered in more detail later in this presentation. We've also taken calls from employers facing compliance investigations and potential penalties. Recently, we assisted an employer regarding a compliance investigation for discriminatory action. This investigation was very complex and required reviewing a significant amount of information with the employer and assisting them with developing their arguments for the appeal and guiding them in the appeal registration process. Most employers have little to no experience with these processes and procedures. We have successfully assisted some employers on their appeals that resulted in penalties being reversed or claim costs being removed from their accounts. This has the potential impact on their annual premiums being reduced as well. On a side note, as an employer, understanding what discriminatory action and the reemployment obligation under the WCB Act is very important. Unfortunately, it has been my experience that a lot of employers don't know about their rights and responsibilities related to this until they are faced with an investigation. And as you can appreciate, that usually makes them quite upset as well. So you have to kind of guide them through it all. So is there any questions about that before I move on to the next part? Okay, so over the next 6 slides, I will provide a general overview of the registration process and how employers are classified and the rate setting process that all have an impact on the premiums paid by employers. All these processes are very complicated and would require more than an hour themselves to explain in detail. So registering with the Workers' Compensation Board is the first step for new employers. Interestingly, not all employers have to have WCB coverage. Employers must have workers' compensation coverage if they employ workers who are doing work in Manitoba and work in a mandatory industry. There are industries excluded by provincial regulation and therefore do not require WCB coverage. Some examples are teachers, barbers and hairdressers, family farms, and travel agents. While workers in mandatory industries are entitled to WCB coverage, employers can purchase optional coverage for workers in non-mandatory industries as well. Owners can even purchase personal coverage for themselves or business partners and directors of corporations. So not unlike how we purchase personal insurance, they can actually insure themselves as well. An example of how this can occur is if you have a young construction worker who starts out working on his own, and as the owner, at that point, they do not require to have coverage. However, this can often becomes more complicated because of the contractor and subcontractor relationships that often occurs in the construction industry. So to bid on some jobs, this new owner or new business owner would likely have to be required to have personal coverage just to be able to bid on jobs. But if he was just working on his own, he wouldn't even have to have WCB coverage. If over time the business continues to grow to the point where the individual starts hiring workers, and because construction is a mandatory industry, this owner would have to purchase coverage for his workers. So you would have an owner working side by side with his workers who are covered while he doesn't have coverage because he opted not to buy the personal coverage. So we're able to assist employers with understanding and navigating their registration process, providing them references to the applicable policies and sections of the Act, and advising who the employer should talk to at the WCB about this process. There's a link on this slide as well for new customers and what to expect when registering. So how is a business classified? The WCB classifies firms based on the industry in which they conduct business, rather than by the occupation of their individual workers. Industry classification is a critical step in the rate-setting system. When an employer registers with the WCB, they will be assigned to an industry classification that best fits their predominant business operations. This is part of that collective liability principle. So for example, using construction again, while a construction company typically employs administrative staff in the office, they would be classified under the construction sector, and all workers, including the administrative staff, would be covered under this classification. Where an employer's business is engaged in a variety of business activities, the WCB may classify the entire operation based on the predominant activity, or they may classify each department separately. Large corporations are employers that often will have departments classified separately. I can use my example. When I was with the Brandon Regional Health Authority, there was at one time where we had different classifications for the laundry and cleaning department versus the regular medical departments and the larger to split them up. Assessment services will require employers to provide details regarding their operations. So within the 9 sectors listed on the slide, there are more than 200 industry classifications for mandatory and optionally covered employers. So it can be very confusing to an employer when they get thrown into a classification just because there are so many different ones. So we've assisted employers with understanding this classification process and the impact on their premiums. In fact, we've recently assisted a large company that has multiple departments by providing questions for them to ask the WCB when questioning their classification of their business. The reason for questioning the classification is there's a potential cost savings depending on the industry classification because of the risk categories assigned, which leads into the next slide. Each industry classification is assigned to a risk category based on claim cost trends over a period of time, over a period of several years, and are set as a percentage of the average assessment rate, ranging from 15% to 800%. So the purpose of grouping the employers together into an industry classification with similar business activities and similar levels of risk is to assist in setting fair and equitable assessment rates that best reflect the collective liability of that group. So in other words, it wouldn't be fair to put a low risk business, have them pay the same rate as a higher risk business does. So that's kind of the reason behind it. And remember, just like personal insurance, the higher the risk, usually the higher the premium you have to pay. So there's 2 examples that I put on the slide. And what I'm going to illustrate here is kind of the impact these risk categories can have on an assessment rate. So the WCB applies an average assessment rate, which is what all insured employers would pay if there is no risk category applied. And in 2023, that amount was 98 cents, which is illustrated on the slide there. So when you look at the first classification one, the manufacturing equipment and appliances, that's a low risk category, so they're at the 15% risk category setting. So when you apply that to the 98 cents, that anybody working in that classification, their assessment rate would be 14 cents, which is paid on every $100 of payroll. Versus a window cleaning, which of course is those people that climb over the buildings and go down and clean windows, which is, of course, is a much higher risk job. So it's at the highest rating of 800%. So when you apply that 800% to the 98 cents average assessment rate, that classification's rate comes out at $7.83, which again gets applied to every $100 of payroll. So that's just to show you kind of illustrate the impact of how they use the risk category to assign different rates to different levels of risk. So we can help employers understand the classification process and the impact on their premiums, and also assist them with, making sure they ask the right questions if they're wondering if they should be in a lower risk or category than they are. So how are rates determined? So the WCB Assessment Services Department determines rates annually. The current rate setting system was actually changed back in 2015 from recommendations as a result of a legislative review, and was developed in consultation with stakeholders, including employers. The changes that were implemented were designed to offer employers more protection through collective liability and less volatility and more stability of rates from year to year. It was found that they felt that with the previous rate setting, it was too punitive, especially on smaller employers who struggled to manage the impact of rate increases. Some of the significant changes made were the establishment of 3 groups of employers based on their assessable payroll. Establishing small, medium, and large employers allowed the WCB to administer the impact of the individual claim costs on small and medium employers more effectively, and allow the WCB to be responsive to the unique circumstances of all employers. Medium and small employers have more weight on the collective experience of their industry for the rate setting instead of their personal claim costs, whereas large employers continue to have more weight on their individual claim costs. This change protects small and medium employers against large rate increases while still promoting large employers' accountability. So what they were finding was small employers couldn't absorb a bad year with their claim costs, where a large employer has the ability to do that because their payroll is so large. A shorter rate setting experience period of 3 years instead of 5 was also implemented. A rate setting experience period is the impact of actual claim costs over a period of time. So they used to take claim costs over 5 years, now they just do it over 3. The change provides employers with a financial incentive to prioritize injury prevention rather than focusing on controlling claim costs after an injury has occurred. So it's created the environment where an employer becomes more proactive than reactive. An annual rate change limit of 15% was implemented. This change was designed to regulate how much rates could go up and down in 1 year. In the prior model, an employer with successive years of increased claim costs could see a rate change as high as 50%, which was a big impact, especially on the smaller employers. Now, with this new 15% being implemented, if an employer has a bad claims experience year that would have resulted in driving up their premiums significantly, only a maximum of 15% can be applied. So the assessment rate is assigned to employers is based on the industry risk as determined as the classification that they get put into, their individual firm claim costs, and the industry classification claim costs in that group that they're assigned into. The benefits of established injury prevention and return to work programs were also incorporated into the system, and they can get rebates and reductions for doing that. As mentioned earlier on, the rate setting procedure is very complicated. There's actually 9 steps involved in determining an employer's assessment rate. So we can help employers understand the complexities of that rating system and ensure they are well informed when contacting the WCB side with questions about this, their rate setting. There's a link on this slide about how the rates are set as well for more information. Employer payroll is the cornerstone of the WCB rate setting system. The employer payroll establishes the total insurable amount of all employers that is used in the assessment rate calculation process, and establishing the employer's size category, and in the end, the premium to be paid by the employer. As I mentioned earlier, that's applied to every $100 of payroll. So as you can see, reporting payroll accurately to the WCB is very important. And what happens each year is on the last day of February, employers are required to submit their actual payroll from the previous calendar year and their estimated payroll for the current year. The estimated payroll is used to establish the premiums that the company would pay for that year. So if you look at it, if you think of it this way, employers are essentially insuring their workers, and how much the workers are paid is the value that is assessed. If an employer is forecasting an increase or decrease in payroll in the up and coming year, it is important that this is reflected in their submission. The actual payroll from the previous calendar year is reviewed, and if it is significantly different than the estimate that was previously provided, the WCB will look at that and make adjustments, and that may put their premium from the previous year up or down, and they may get a credit or they may have to pay some more. The WCB will also conduct payroll audits periodically, or if there are reporting concerns raised by the Assessment Services Department, they would do an audit in that sense too. Late or inaccurate reporting can result in penalties to the employer. Most employers do not realize the power the WCB Act provides the WCB when investigating claim account related issues. I recently dealt with an employer that was concerned about the WCB requesting payroll from previous years dating back almost 10 years. They felt that they were being harassed by the WCB, which was not the case. I was able to explain to the employer the payroll audit procedure and the policies and areas of the Act that supported the WCB's request. Needless to say, they weren't necessarily happy about the answer that was provided. However, they were at least informed and better understood the requirements that were requested. So this is an example of how the Employer Advisor Office can help employers understand the importance of providing accurate and timely information and the implications for late reporting or submitting inaccurate payroll information. Are there any questions at this point? Let's see. So as outlined on the slide, this WCB policy states, whenever a worker suffers a reportable injury, it is mandatory the employer reports the accident and the resulting injury to the WCB within 5 business days. So what is a reportable injury? Well, just like everything that I've been talking about today, the definition of a reportable injury under the Act is very complex. There are 8 conditions that can be applied to the requirement to report. Along with that, the WCB term arising out of and in the course of, and how this applies to a reportable injury is a phrase most employers should be aware of. However, simply put, when a worker is hurt on the job and needs medical attention, or there is time lost from the work past the day of the incident, the employer must file a report with the WCB. So the report must be filed within 5 days from the date the worker was injured or the day the employer finds out about the injury. Having an established injury reporting procedure for staff helps to ensure the employers are informed of an injury in a timely manner. Employer must still report the injury even if they question the validity of the claim, but may include a written statement of disagreement. All too often, I field calls from employers that haven't contacted the WCB in a timely manner because they didn't agree that the worker was hurt at work or that the worker was at fault. So I have to, it's a reminder that, that workers' compensation is a no-fault insurance. And it is also up to the WCB to determine if there's been a compensable incident or not. And often the scenario is a worker would get hurt or there would be something happen, say on a Friday, but they don't tell the employer about it till Monday or Tuesday the following week. And often an employer would question, well, what was he doing on the weekend and things like that. But again, that's up to the WCB to determine and not the employer themselves. So we're here to help them understand why and when a workplace incident should be reported to the WCB and their rights and responsibilities in this situation. Late reporting can result in a $500 penalty and being assessed to the employer. The WCB has made it easy for reporting as it can be done online, on the website, or by phone, fax, or by mail. And there are 2 links on this slide with more information as well. The reconsideration process is often referred to as the appeal process. If an employer disagrees with the decision with respect to a claim or their employer account, they can request to have the decision reconsidered. The Employer Advisor Office can guide employers through this process by providing advice and assistance. As mentioned earlier, we can't represent them, but we can kind of guide them through guide them along the way kind of thing. It is a complicated and complex situation, like most things with the WCB, because the reconsideration argument must be specifically directed to the decision provided by the WCB. And all WCB decisions must be supported by the Act and policy. A decision letter that doesn't reference the appropriate part of the Act or policy can add strength to an appeal, actually. Claim-related decisions typically involve the employer requesting a copy of all the relevant claimant file information. And although we can't request this information for them, the employer can share it with us. Account-related decisions could involve reviewing their account information with the employer as well. WCB staff have many resources at their disposal to assist with making their decisions. They have a medical department with medical advisors, they have legal advisors, they have their managers and directors that they can go to. Most employers have no one. We can and have assisted employers representatives to prepare their arguments and key points for the issue. The first step of the reconsideration process is to discuss the issue with the decision maker and attempt to reach a resolution. So this could be a discussion with an adjudicator or a case manager regarding the acceptance of a worker's claim, or they could be having a discussion with the assessment services for a fine levied for submission of payroll information, or it could be a discussion with the compliance officer regarding a penalty assessed for discriminatory action. If after that discussion a resolution is not reached, a formal reconsideration process can be initiated. It is at this point that the reconsideration process may be different depending on the type of decision that is being appealed. This process involves preparing written submissions in the case of an appeal commission hearing, presenting the arguments to a three-person tribunal. Assistance at this level often involves multiple meetings and reviewing a significant amount of evidence with the employer. We found that employers require assistance with each step of this process and have been there right from the start right to the end, providing assistance with every step along the way. Most employers don't have the time or experience to handle this, and that's what we're there for, to assist and provide them assistance and guidance through this. So employers don't need to feel that they must navigate the system on their own. The Employer Advisor Office is here to help. So thanks for attending today. I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Yeah, Todd, I have a question.
Yep.
So kind of my question is like, is the WCB only available for employees as well as the business owner, or is it just like the people that are employed in the job? Like, do business owner have WCB?
The business owners can purchase personal coverage. So if I own a business, I don't have to have coverage, but I have to, and I have to be in a mandatory industry, like I mentioned. But if I'm in a mandatory industry, all my workers are covered, and that's even in the sense of, I start a business, I hire workers, and I don't even know about WCB until one of my workers gets hurt. Like, I didn't register or anything. At that time, they would be fully covered, and I would have to start paying my premiums immediately, and there would possibly could be a penalty or a fine that's levied as well. But an actual owner does not have to have coverage, but they can purchase personal coverage, and it's usually to their advantage to do that. Especially, it depends on the type of work they're doing. Like, if I'm own a construction company, I'm working side by side with my workers, it's worth my while to get coverage because I have just as much chance of getting hurt as they do, right? So versus an owner that's, works behind a desk like I do, well, the likelihood of an injury is a lot lower.
Right.
Sure.
And the other question I had was like, what if the claim gets denied? Like, is that when you would go to an employer advisor, or do WCB have advisors that can review the application?
No, like, if they won't, if a decision is made on a claim to, say, deny a claim, typically what will happen there is that's not a bad thing for the employer, because now none of the claim costs would be on their experience. But that's where the worker advisor office comes into play a lot. Like, they will actually represent and assist workers with an appeal for, say, a claim that's denied. Now, if I'm an employer who the claim gets accepted and I disagree with that, then yeah, the step would be to appeal that. And what we're finding, and what was found in the legislative review, is most employers don't know how to navigate that whole system when appealing. And that's what we're finding is true since we've opened up business as well, is employers just don't have the experience or the knowledge and the time to put up a good argument for an appeal. So yeah.
Okay, cool. And also like when, the most of the time, like if you have an injury, they'll like require you to see like some kind of healthcare provider. Can you choose your own doctor? Um, when they say like, hey, you need to go see some type of like I don't know, like I know sometimes like some workplace don't allow you to choose your own doctor. Like they'll say like you need to be seeing like somebody like in a different like in a specific field. Like is that
Like a
allowed? Like is
specialist
like
or
yeah,
yeah.
like a specialist or
The like my experience, like having previously been with the WCB, is they wouldn't typically direct you where to seek treatment, but there is an expectation under the act that a worker does seek treatment and take part in treatment. And like you say, that often would involve, say, having to go to a specialist depending on the type of injury
yeah,
or attending physio. Those are all expectations of a worker. And if they don't, then there are steps that the WCB would take to mitigate that situation. And
okay,
there is that expectation that they attend treatment, attend return to works when they're expected to. So that's where an employer may get involved. Like, if an employer is able to accommodate some restrictions and get somebody back to work early into a modified return to work, then the expectation is that the worker gets involved. So if they
mm,
don't, then that's when the employer can go to the WCB and say, hey, this guy should be back to work, so he shouldn't be entitled to getting paid wages while he's sitting at home, kind of thing. So, yep. And we've assisted workers, or sorry, employers in situations similar to that. So, yeah.
okay, awesome. Okay, is there anybody else that has questions or want to throw some questions in the chat or want to put their camera? Oh, I think Anastasia. Anastasia? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, hi.
Hey,
Yeah, I have a small question. Are you doing or planning to do presentations for employers?
Oh,
I
we
mean,
certainly could. Yeah.
presentation about what are you doing? What's your office, and like what are you doing? Are you planning to do presentations?
We could certainly do that. We've done presentations to different groups like Construction Safety Association of Manitoba, like more like associations.
Yeah.
But yeah, but if there is an employer that's interested in this, or yeah, we'd be happy to do that. Yeah.
Okay, okay, perfectly. Do you want it because I'm working as an employer liaison at the Immigrant Center Manitoba, and I'm dealing with employers, and sometimes they are getting back with some kind of questions
Yep,
where to seek for help, so I can guide them and direct them to you if you're doing
definitely.
presentations. Yeah, okay,
Yep, you
okay,
bet. Sure.
perfect.
Yep.
Thank you.
okay. Is there any other question, Lynn, Reza? Okay. So also Todd, I had another question. Like, so the employer advisor, like, are you guys tied in with WCB or is it like a separate entity? Like, is like, do you guys kind of like, is that like a partnership? Like, how does that work?
We are totally separate from them.
Okay.
The and that one of the keys behind that, and the same with the work advisor office, is we don't answer to the WCB. We're actually the province of Manitoba employees.
Mm,
So we are totally separate. We can speak to us in confidence. And like the example I gave earlier was an employer didn't want to talk to the WCB and kind of raise some red flags. He's thinking about changing his operations and how this might impact his business. So he contacted us, and we were able to kind of look at, well, here's what could occur if you this kind of looked at what could happen with that kind of thing, and that way they're more comfortable knowing they can speak in confidence with
right.
us if they're not. So yeah, we're totally separate. The interesting thing is both divisions are funded by the WCB. So in other words, it's not taxpayer money that's paying my wages. It's paid by the WCB premiums, but we are totally separate from
Okay.
the WCB for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Sweet. Lynn, you have a question. I see you have the hand raise feature. Yeah, if you want to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me right now?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, that's good. Oh, my question is, if all employees work from home remotely, is there any special regulation in Manitoba?
No, there's no special regulation related to working from home, although because of the change since the pandemic and the amount of people working from home, it certainly has had an impact on a couple of things. And one of the ones that we came across was when I mentioned about employers, an employer might be from out of province but have workers that reside in Manitoba and they work from home. They would be covered. They would have to get covered by WCB in Manitoba because they reside in Manitoba. So there are instances where you have a company that's from BC with employees working in Manitoba. So then they're registered in both BC and Manitoba under the WCB. There's no specific wording about work from home. When an injury occurs, the adjudicator will follow the same process adjudicating that claim as they would on any injury claim. And it does, my experience when I was at the WCB was it does get fairly hard to adjudicate because I'm working from home today, but if I go and take my break and slip and fall, when was I not working? So that, and I mentioned arising out of in the course of employment, that's what covers an injury. So it has to be arising out of in the course of employment. So it has to be something that I'm doing related to my work in the course of my work. And so adjudicating work from home injuries is difficult, but it's done the same way.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your answer.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again, Todd, again for this great insight. And also thanks everyone for attending this webinar. So we'll close up the webinar here. And again, if you have any follow-up question, you can always email me or Todd. And I hope I see you guys in the next webinar.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everybody.
Thank
All
you.
right, take care.
Thank you.